It was a cold and rainy evening in the small town of Greenhill. The streets were almost empty. The wind moved through the trees, and dark clouds covered the moon. At the end of a narrow road stood an old house called Rosewood House. The house belonged to a rich businessman named Mr. Henry Blake. Henry Blake was 62 years old. He had made a lot of money from hotels and restaurants. He was famous in the town, but he was not very popular. Many people respected him. Very few people liked him. Henry was a hard man. He trusted almost nobody. He often argued with his family and workers. That evening, he had invited 5 people to Rosewood House for dinner. His daughter, Emma Blake, was there. His younger brother, Robert Blake, was there. His business partner, Daniel Morris, was also invited. Henry's lawyer, Mr. Clark, came with some important papers. The last person was Mrs. Wilson, Henry's housekeeper. She had worked in the house for more than 20 years. At 7 o'clock, everyone sat around the large dining table. Fire was burning in the fireplace. Outside, rain hit the windows. Inside, nobody looked comfortable. Henry Blake sat at the head of the table. He slowly looked at everyone. "I asked all of you to come here because I have made an important decision," he said. Emma looked worried. "What decision, Father?" Henry took a drink of water. "I have changed my will." The room became silent. Robert stopped eating. Daniel looked at Henry carefully. Emma asked, "Why?" Henry smiled. "Because I finally know who I can trust." Robert put down his fork. "What does that mean?" "It means exactly what I said." Robert's face became red. "You always talk in this mysterious way." Henry looked at him. "Maybe people should be careful when they have secrets." Robert stood up. "Are you talking about me?" Henry smiled again. "Sit down, Robert." For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Robert slowly sat down. Mrs. Wilson entered the room with coffee. As she placed a cup near Henry, her hand shook. Henry noticed it. "Are you all right, Mrs. Wilson?" "Yes, sir." But she did not look at him. Daniel Morris leaned back in his chair. "Henry, you called us here. So tell us what is happening." Henry looked at Mr. Clark. The lawyer opened his black bag. "I have Mr. Blake's new will here," he said. Emma looked surprised. "Are you reading it tonight?" Henry shook his head. "Not yet." He stood up. "I want to speak to each of you privately first." He turned toward the door. "I will be in my study." Henry left the dining room. Nobody said anything for almost a minute. Finally, Emma spoke. "I hate this." Robert laughed quietly. "Your father enjoys controlling people. He is your brother." "Yes," said Robert. "That is why I know him." Daniel looked toward the study door. "This is going to be a long evening." At 8:15, Mrs. Wilson went into Henry's study. She came out 10 minutes later. Her face was pale. Emma walked toward her. "What happened?" "Nothing, Miss Emma. But you look frightened." "I am just tired." Mrs. Wilson quickly walked away. At 8:30, Daniel went inside. People in the dining room could hear angry voices. "You cannot do this," Daniel shouted. Then Henry's voice answered, "I can do whatever I want with my company." Daniel came out 5 minutes later. His face was full of anger. Robert smiled. "Good meeting." Daniel ignored him. At 8:45, Robert went into the study. This meeting was even louder. "You promised me," Robert shouted. Henry answered, "That was before I discovered the truth." "What truth?" "You know exactly what I mean." A minute later, Robert opened the study door and walked out. He looked very angry. Emma stood near the stairs. "What happened?" "Ask your father." Then Robert walked into the library. At 9 o'clock, Emma entered her father's study. Unlike the other meetings, hers was quiet. After 10 minutes, Emma came out. She had tears in her eyes. "Emma?" Daniel asked. She shook her head. "I do not want to talk." She went upstairs. Mr. Clark checked his watch. "Mr. Blake asked me to see him at 9:30. The old lawyer sat down near the fireplace. Outside, the storm became stronger. Suddenly, all the lights in the house went out. The house became completely dark. Emma screamed from upstairs. Mrs. Wilson said, "Do not move. I will find some candles." Everyone waited. For almost 1 minute, nobody could see anything. Then the lights came back. "What happened?" Robert asked. "Probably the storm," said Daniel. Mr. Clark looked at his watch again. 9:28. He picked up his bag. "I should go to Henry." He walked toward the study. A few seconds later, everyone heard him shout, "Good God!" They all ran toward him. Henry Blake was sitting behind his desk. His head was resting on the chair. There was a knife in his chest. Emma covered her mouth. "Father!" Mrs. Wilson screamed. Robert stood completely still. Daniel whispered, "He is dead." Mr. Clark slowly moved away from the desk. Nobody touch anything. 25 minutes later, Detective James Carter arrived at Rosewood House. Carter was 40 years old. He was calm, polite, and very observant. He entered the study with a police officer. Henry Blake was still sitting behind the desk. The knife was in his chest. On the table were several papers, a glass of water, and a small clock. A window behind Henry was open. Rain had entered the room. The curtains were wet. The officer looked at the window. Maybe the killer came through there. Detective Carter walked toward it. He looked outside. The ground below the window was soft because of the rain, but there were no footprints. "Interesting," he said. He turned around. "Nobody came through this window." "How do you know?" "If somebody climbed through it tonight, there would be clear footprints in the mud." Carter looked at the knife. Then he noticed something on the floor. A small piece of blue cloth. He picked it up carefully. "That may be important." Detective Carter asked everyone to remain in the house. He started with Emma. They sat in the library. "When did you last see your father alive?" Carter asked. "Around 9:10. "What did you talk about?" Emma looked down. "He told me about his new will." "He said he was leaving most of his money to a charity." Carter raised an eyebrow. "Not to you?" "No." "Were you angry?" Emma shook her head. "I was shocked. But the money belonged to him." "Why were you crying when you left the study?" Emma was quiet. Then she said, "He told me he had cancer." Detective Carter looked at her. "Did anyone else know?" "I do not think so." "Where were you when the lights went out?" "In my bedroom." "Alone?" "Yes." Carter wrote something in his notebook. Next, he spoke to Robert Blake. Robert looked nervous. "You argued with your brother tonight," said Carter. "We often argued." "What was the argument about?" "Money." "What kind of money?" Robert sighed. "I borrowed money from Henry. A lot of money." "How much?" "Almost £200,000. "And he wanted it back?" "Worse. He told me he was going to the police." "Why?" Robert looked away. "Some of the documents I gave him were false." Detective Carter's eyes became serious. "So your brother believed you had cheated him?" Robert nodded. "Did you kill him?" "No." "Where were you during the power cut?" "In the library." "Alone?" "Yes." "So nobody can confirm that?" "No." Carter looked at Robert's jacket. It was dark gray, not blue. Daniel Morris was next. He looked confident. "You had a serious argument with Henry," Carter said. "Yes." "About the company?" Daniel nodded. "Henry wanted to sell his part of the business." "Why did that upset you?" "If he sold his shares, I could lose control of the company." "How much money was involved?" "Millions." "That gives you a strong reason to want him dead." Daniel smiled coldly. "A reason is not proof." "Where were you when the lights went out?" "In the dining room." "Alone?" "No. Mrs. Wilson was there for part of the time." Carter wrote that down. Then he looked at Daniel's clothes. Daniel was wearing a blue suit. Detective Carter remembered the small piece of blue cloth found near Henry's desk. "Can I see your right sleeve?" Daniel looked confused. "Why?" "Please." Daniel raised his arm. Near the wrist, a small piece of material was missing. Robert, who was standing near the door, suddenly said, "There. That is your killer." Daniel became angry. "This proves nothing." Detective Carter said nothing. He simply continued looking at the sleeve. Mrs. Wilson was the next person to be questioned. She sat with her hands together. "You have worked for Mr. Blake for many years," said Carter. 23 years. "Did you like him?" She hesitated. "He could be difficult." "What did you discuss in the study?" Mrs. Wilson looked frightened. "My son." "Your son?" "Yes. Peter used to work for Mr. Blake." "What happened?" "Mr. Blake accused him of stealing money." "Did your son steal it?" "No." "How do you know?" "Because Peter told me he did not." "What happened to him?" "He went to prison." Mrs. Wilson's voice became weak. "He died there last year." Detective Carter was silent for a moment. "So you had a reason to hate Henry Blake?" She looked at him. "I hated what happened to my son, but I did not kill Mr. Blake." "Where were you when the lights went out?" "In the dining room." "Was Daniel Morris there?" "At first, yes." "At first?" Mrs. Wilson looked surprised. "Yes. He left for a short time." Daniel, who was standing nearby, suddenly said, "That is not true." Mrs. Wilson turned toward him. "It is true." Detective Carter looked at Daniel. "Where did you go?" "I went to get my phone from the hallway. For how long? Maybe 30 seconds? Long enough to reach the study? Daniel said nothing. Finally, Detective Carter spoke with Mr. Clark. The lawyer was calm. You were supposed to meet Henry at 9:30. Yes. And you found the body. Correct. What was in your bag? Legal papers, including his new will. Can I see it? Mr. Clark opened the bag. He gave the document to the detective. Carter read it. Henry Blake was leaving a large amount of money to Emma, not to charity. Detective Carter looked up. Emma told me her father was giving most of his money to charity. Mr. Clark looked surprised. That was his old plan. Old plan. Yes, he changed his mind yesterday. Did Emma know that? I do not think so. Who did know? Mr. Clark thought. Henry, me, and possibly Daniel. Why Daniel? Henry told me he planned to remove Daniel from the company and give Emma his shares. Detective Carter slowly closed the document. Now the case was becoming clearer. Carter returned to the study. He stood alone for several minutes. He looked at the open window, the knife, the wet curtains, the glass of water, the clock. Then he noticed something strange. The small clock on Henry's desk had stopped. It showed 9:22. The officer entered. Do you think that is the time of death? Maybe. Carter picked up the clock. Then he smiled. No. Why? This clock uses a battery. It did not stop because of the power cut. He turned it over. The battery had been removed. Someone wanted the police to believe Henry died at 9:22. But why? Asked the officer. Because the killer needed us to believe Henry died before the lights went out. Carter walked toward the door. Gather everyone. 5 minutes later, everyone stood in the dining room. Detective Carter faced them. I know who killed Henry Blake. Emma held her hands together. Robert looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Mrs. Wilson. Carter continued. The killer tried to make this murder look complicated. The open window was meant to suggest that an outsider entered the house. He looked around the room, but there were no footprints outside the window, so the window was opened from inside. Nobody spoke. Then there was the clock. Someone removed its battery and set the time to 9:22. Robert asked, Why? Make us believe Mr. Blake died before the power cut. Carter turned toward Daniel. The killer wanted an excuse for being missing during the darkness. Daniel's face changed. You are accusing me because of my jacket. The cloth is one clue, said Carter, but it is not the most important clue. Then what is? Detective Carter walked toward the table. The glass of water. Everyone looked confused. Carter continued. The doctor found something interesting during the first examination. Mr. Blake was already weak before he was stabbed. Someone had put a sleeping drug in his water. Mrs. Wilson gasped. The knife was used to make the murder look violent and sudden, said Carter. But the killer first drugged him. He turned to Daniel. Wilson served the coffee, but Daniel poured Henry's water before dinner. Daniel shook his head. That proves nothing. No, but your argument with Henry gave us your motive. He planned to remove you from the business, Daniel said. Robert had a motive too. Yes. Carter stepped closer. But Robert did not know about the new business agreement. Daniel became silent. You knew, said Carter. You also knew Henry planned to give his shares to Emma. If Henry signed the papers tomorrow, you would lose millions. Daniel's face was now pale. Carter continued. During the power cut, you left the dining room. You walked into the study. Henry was already becoming sleepy because of the drug. No, you stabbed him, opened the window, stopped the clock, and returned. Daniel pointed at Robert. What about him? Nobody saw him during the power cut. Detective Carter nodded. True, but there is one final problem for you. He took the small blue piece of cloth from an evidence bag. This cloth matches your jacket. Daniel looked at it. He said nothing. The cloth was caught on the sharp corner of Henry's desk when you leaned over him. Daniel's hands began to shake. Emma stared at him. Why? Daniel? Daniel looked around the room. His confident expression was gone. You do not understand. Emma's voice broke. You killed my father. Egil suddenly shouted. He was going to destroy everything. Nobody moved. For 25 years, I built that company with him. 25 years. And then he decided to remove me like I was nobody. Detective Carter spoke quietly. So you killed him. Daniel closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there were tears in them. I only wanted to stop him. By murdering him, Daniel did not answer. The police officer walked forward and placed handcuffs on him. The storm ended just before midnight. The clouds slowly moved away from the moon. Emma stood near the front door as the police car took Daniel away. Robert came to stand beside her. "I'm sorry," he said. Emma looked at him. "For what?" "For everything." He took a deep breath. "Your father was right about me. I did lie to him about the money." Emma said nothing. "I am going to tell the police everything tomorrow." Emma looked surprised. "Why?" Robert looked toward the road. "Because tonight made me understand something." "What?" "Secrets always become dangerous when we keep them too long." Inside the house, Detective Carter closed his notebook. Mrs. Wilson walked toward him. "Detective?" "Yes? How did you really know it was Daniel?" Carter smiled. "The clues told me. The jacket? That helped. The clock? That helped too. Then what was the main clue?" Carter looked toward the study. "Daniel made one small mistake." "What mistake?" "When I first arrived, I never told anyone where the knife was found." Mrs. Wilson looked confused. Carter continued. "But during his first conversation with me, Daniel said, 'The knife on Henry's desk proves nothing.'" Mrs. Wilson's eyes became wide. "But the knife was not on the desk." "Exactly. It was in Miss Blake's chest." Carter nodded. "Only someone who had already been inside the study after the murder could have known exactly what the scene looked like." Mrs. Wilson slowly smiled. "So the murderer caught himself." Detective Carter picked up his coat. "Most murderers do." He walked toward the door. Behind him, the old Rosewood House became quiet again. The rain had stopped. The mystery was over. But for everyone inside that house, the night would never be forgotten.